All right. Well, hello, everybody out there. And my name is Ellen Miles. I am the Programming and Outreach Coordinator at the Camas Public Library, and you are joining us for another local author chat. And this evening, I am honored to have Sandra Gangle with us. I'm very excited to have you here. I have a little bio to read about you and your work, and then I have some questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, great. So Sandra Gangle grew up in Massachusetts and became a French teacher. She moved to Oregon in 1966 to earn her master's degree at University of Oregon and then taught French language and literature at Oregon State and Willamette University for 10 years. In 1977, she was finally able to attend law school, which had been her lifelong dream. And by that time, she was married and had two young children, ages 4 and 6. As a lawyer, Sandra specialized in the fighting for the rights of persons experiencing employment discrimination. Eventually, she became the first Oregon woman to be approved as a labor and employment arbitrator, like a judge, resolving disputes between labor unions and management. She had hundreds of cases in the Pacific Northwest, many in Washington State. She retired in 2017 and moved to Camas to live near her daughter's family. She is now an active volunteer at the Camas Library, where she conducts the Great Decisions Foreign Policy Discussion Group. Sandra published her memoir, Madame Arbitrator, in 2020, just as the pandemic started, and she looks forward to telling us about her book. And I am looking forward to hearing about your book and your process and everything like that. So my first question is just kind of an easy one. I'm just interested in you telling us a little bit about yourself, maybe beyond the bio I just read.
Thank you, Ellen, for that nice introduction. I'm very pleased to be here. And this is the cover of my book for the audience that's watching. But it's the story of my life, but it's not the story that I thought it was going to be. I call it the zigzag route to becoming a labor arbitrator. It was not a direct line. I didn't start off wanting to become a labor arbitrator. I didn't even know what an arbitrator was until I was about 35 years old. As you said, I grew up in Brockton, Massachusetts, a working class city about 20 miles outside of Boston. There were many shoe factories, and most of the men in town worked in those shoe factories. And I knew that they belonged to a union and that the union contract gave them many rights. But I never knew that those contracts probably included a provision for arbitration that was designed to help them file grievances when they believed their contract rights were being violated. I thought their only option was to go out on strike if they needed to fight for their rights. And I remember seeing some of those working men downtown carrying picket signs and saying that they were on strike, yelling things like, "We want fair wages and safe working conditions." And I knew that only men held those union jobs and had union rights. Most of the women stayed home with their children. Women who did work had jobs as store clerks or secretaries. Others were teachers or nurses. None of those jobs were unionized. So women couldn't bargain for their working conditions. I myself had several jobs when I was a teenager. I worked on weekends in a fish market. In the summer times, I had several different jobs. First, I made sandwiches on a lunch counter. Then I worked as a cashier in a department store. Then I worked in a business office and a medical clinic. My goal was to save money so that I could go to college and have a career of some type. My dream, of course, was to become a lawyer, maybe even a judge. And why did I make that career choice? It started when I was 8 years old. I attended an actual court proceeding with my mother and her lawyer as my parents' marriage was ending. The family court judge asked to talk to me in chambers to learn which parent I preferred to live with. I felt proud to be able to speak up and tell the judge that my brother and I wanted to stay with mom. When the judge listened to me and granted my request, I felt empowered. Then when I was 15, I was in court for a second time. I had suffered some injuries in an automobile accident, and I had to testify to a jury about what had happened. My mother's lawyer, Mr. Cotter, represented me in that case. He explained everything that would happen during the trial. And then as the trial progressed, I admired his skill at asking the right questions of me and the other witnesses and talking to the jury. He carefully proved that the driver of the car that had caused the accident had lied to the police chief, and the mistake that she made that led to my injuries. So the jury ruled in my favor. I won my case.
Great.
In both of those courtroom situations, I observed something important. There were no women, lawyers or judges, only men. I thought that was not fair. I believe there should be a balance of men and women so that all litigants could feel equal in their search for justice. And so I believed that I could do that work just as well as a man could. And I made the decision that I would become a lawyer myself. Well, I told my guidance counselor that in high school, and she took me aside and said, "Oh my goodness, you'll never be able to get a job in the legal profession, so it really doesn't make sense for you to plan to go through college and law school for 7 years. You'll only be able to work as a legal secretary after all of that." She said, "Sandra, you need a plan B, something that's more appropriate for women." I was very disappointed to hear that, but I followed her advice. I came up with a plan B. I would be a foreign language teacher. How did I make that decision? I had a friend named Tina who had been adopted by my neighbors when I was about 8 years old. She was 10. She was an orphan from Greece. And when she came to America, she spoke no English. So I became her friend and I taught her English words. And in return, she taught me some Greek words and phrases. Then later, when I was in high school, I studied Latin and French and enjoyed learning those languages. So I told my counselor, okay, my plan B will be as a foreign language teacher. Then I'll be able to help people who speak foreign languages communicate with each other to solve their problems. Mm-hmm. So I went to college in New York, and after that, I taught French in a middle school back in Brockton for 2 years. Then I was offered a teaching assistantship at the University of Oregon. And I came across country to start a new life on the West Coast, and I never moved back.
That's great. That's great.
I taught French and English as a second language. Mm-hmm. And guess what? Then eventually in 1964, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act, which outlawed sex discrimination in employment. There could no longer be jobs for men only. It took a while for that law to work its way through the appeals and the court system. But finally, I noticed that women were beginning to get into law school and they were getting hired as lawyers. So I told my husband that I would like to follow my childhood dream and go to law school and become a lawyer. He supported that decision. I went back to Willamette University's College of Law, and 3 years later, when I was 37 years old, I was sworn in as a lawyer.
Great. And is the rest is history, as they say?
Well, yes. When I was in law school, I studied employment and labor case law, because I was very much interested in that whole area of the law. And I wanted to help with fighting employment discrimination, especially for women and persons of color. And I was very fortunate to have a mentor. One of my professors in law school, Professor Carlton Snow, was a nationally known labor arbitrator. He hired me as a law clerk and he gave me advice. I asked him, how I could follow in his footsteps, because I saw that as an alternative to my childhood dream of becoming a judge, that the arbitrator is like a judge in the employment and labor arena, because those cases don't go to courts. Those cases are contract matters that are heard by arbitrators privately outside of the court proceeding. And I finally had learned that after all these years. And Professor Snow at the beginning was not very encouraging to me. He said, you know, Sandra, you're going to face a big obstacle if you want to become an arbitrator. You're a woman. He said, the parties are used to seeing only men serving as arbitrators. It'll be an uphill battle to establish yourself in the profession. You'll have a lot of difficulty being selected to decide cases. But he gave me a roadmap to follow. And he encouraged me to pursue it, but he said, you know, it's going to be tough. And I was willing to give it my all.
Great.
I followed his advice, and eventually I qualified, and I became the first Oregon woman to be approved as a labor arbitrator.
That's great.
And on the national level, I heard many, many cases throughout the Pacific Northwest and Northern California.
Great.
So how did I come to Camas? I do want to cover that.
Mhm.
I retired from my arbitration work in 2017 and moved here to Camas to spend more time with my daughter, Melanie, and my beautiful granddaughter, Maria, who live here. And I'm very happy in this community. As you said, I work as a volunteer leader of discussion groups through the library and also through the League of Women Voters. I'm also an artist, and I do watercolor painting, and I love to walk through Camas's parks and hiking trails.
That's wonderful. Wonderful. Well, going back to the book that you published in 2020 that you held up there for a moment, what was it like to write that book?
Well, it was a slow process. I wrote it. I wrote the first part of it 20 years ago. And in 2002 and 2003, I suffered from breast cancer. And then I had 4 joint replacements, both hips and both knees. So I underwent a lot of hospitalizations and was concerned about the future of my health. So I knew that my children did not know much about my early life. They knew me as a lawyer and an arbitrator, but they never knew me back in Massachusetts and what life was like back there. So I wrote a lot of chapters in my spare time, just so that I would be able to share my story with them now that they were old enough to read it. But I got my health back. And so I tucked away those chapters and went on with my life. And I went back to my arbitration practice after that. But then when I retired, I went back east for my 55th college reunion. And when I did that, some friends of mine asked if they knew that I had written some chapters of my life story. And they said, we've got a writing group. We'd like you to read some of your chapters to us. So I did. And they were very congratulatory. And they said, you have had a very interesting life. People would be interested in learning more about your life. You should finish that book and publish it. So I thought about that. And when I came back to the Northwest, I got to work. And it took me about 6 months after that to polish off the early chapters and then to bring the book up to date. And the final chapters are really a discussion of the current status of unionization in America and my feelings about that, because I do feel that it is tragic that the unions are not as able to attract workers now as they were in the past. I do believe that that is going to show a downturn in the middle class opportunities for workers, and I'm concerned about that.
So when
So-
you were, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I worked about every morning, 6 hours every 6 mornings a week, about for at least 3 hours at a time. And then I would review and edit what I had written the previous day before I started new material. So I had a regular process that to follow to make sure that I finished the book in a timely manner.
Great. And that kind of is a great segue to my next question of once your book was done, how did you get it published? What was the next step after that?
Well, first I researched the publishing industry, and I found it to be somewhat mysterious. In fact, I found it unwelcome because I wasn't already a famous person, and I lacked a huge platform of possible readers who might be interested in reading my book. Therefore, publishers were not that interested in my particular subject matter or even considering my book for the simple reason that they didn't think there would be a big market for it. So I did have an editor who was a very talented woman who helped me to flesh out some parts of my book that she felt would be more interesting to readers. And she also helped me to leave out some extraneous matters because she said, you really want to get it to 75,000 words. And we did. And that was her suggestion for the ideal size. And then she suggested that I submit it to some feminist publishers, which I did. And there was a publisher, I think it was somebody in Minnesota, who was interested in that book, but said it would take at least 2 years before they would get it onto their publishing calendar.
Wow.
Because again, there are a lot of people out there writing books, and the publishers can only publish, according to their schedule. So I wanted it published right away, so I kept looking, and then I decided I would self-publish through Luminary Press in Eugene, Oregon. I was very happy with the work that they did for me. They recommended that I have my picture taken and have my own picture as the cover photo. And then they included photographs from my life story throughout the book. And they worked steadily with me on the setup. And they also recommended that I speak to some professionals to read my manuscript and to consider writing some reviews that could be included as the foreword and also as blurbs of support on the back cover. So I followed all the instructions and got the book published.
Yeah. Was there anything in that whole publishing process that surprised you?
Well, as I say, I was surprised that I was able to get some good support from my professional colleagues. And the Supreme Court Justice Robert Durham wrote the foreword for the book. And then a former Oregon State Bar president, Mitzi Knockler, read the manuscript and wrote a review for the back cover, and 2 other professionals. So that was really a tribute that pleased me. But what really surprised me the most was that just as it was published on March 20th, 2020, we were in the middle of a pandemic. So I was not able to travel to give book presentations to law schools and college groups, which was a market that I really felt would be interested in reading my book. And I had to rely on virtual meetings, which are small. When you have a virtual meeting of 6 or 7, it's not the same as speaking to a dormitory hall or an auditorium where you might have 100 to 400 people listening and asking questions. So as a result, my marketing options have remained very limited.
Yeah.
And I do sell the books through Amazon, and I do still conduct book club meetings on Zoom. In fact, I have a couple coming up in April.
Oh, nice. Nice.
So it's ongoing, but it's just not quite as broad in scope as it could be if we were not in the midst of a pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, do you have any advice for aspiring authors?
Well, what I would say is follow your dream. If you have a message, follow that, write your book. And once you start, stick with it, finish it, be passionate, know what your message is and who you are talking to, because you can't talk to the whole world, but your message might appeal to certain parts of society, either women or perhaps students, young people, perhaps elderly people, depending on what your topic is and your message. Then make an outline of what you intend to cover and write every day following that outline. Edit what you wrote the previous day, because you always see it with new eyes after 24 hours have passed, and you can clear up and read it then as if you were a reader needing to hear the sentences slightly differently than your way that you drafted them the first time. You'll always write too many words, so be ready to cut. My editor taught me that. But you'll also need to flesh out some space, some material that you covered a little too sketchy, and it was too sketchy a way with your first draft. So be prepared to make corrections along the way. And once you've gone through all those steps, try to get an agent. If you decide to self-publish, don't pick the first one you find. They're all different, very different. And not only the contracts that they ask you to sign are very different, but the cost that you will incur can vary tremendously. So don't hesitate to shop around. Be flexible, but hang in there, get it done. You'll be glad you did.
Great. That is really good advice. Okay, next question. Do you have a favorite book that you would recommend to just everybody?
Well, I like to read memoirs because I'm very much interested in people and how they got to where they are. And there are 2 recent books that I got at the Camas Library that I just recommend that people read, because for one thing, we are in the process now of looking for a new Supreme Court justice. And one of the more recent ones that was appointed back in the Obama administration was Sonia Sotomayor. My Beloved World is her book. And she had a very interesting life. She grew up in Puerto Rico, and she grew up in a very poor setting when she was, actually she was born in America. Her mother was Puerto Rican. But they lived in a very poor situation in New York City. And she had a childhood illness that, of course, is life, it's called childhood diabetes, juvenile diabetes. But when you have that as a child, it's a lifelong disease. So she has to cope with that as her disability. And that has been caused adversity along her entire career. The other book that I picked up fairly recently, and I think is wonderful, is Katherine Johnson's My Remarkable Journey. Those of you who have seen the movie Hidden Figures know that Katherine was the mathematician who was very, very responsible for getting John Glenn safely into space and back again. And this was all before computers. She did her math on paper and pencil and using a slide rule. But it's a wonderful story. And she also had a life of adversity, being a Black woman.
Mm-hmm. All right, wonderful. Well, I'll reference those two titles in the YouTube description when this gets posted to YouTube a little bit later. Okay, well, right now I have a couple questions from the audience, if you are game for that. Stuart from Camus wants to know, he writes in, I'm interested in writing my own memoir, but I'm worried my life story isn't interesting enough. Do you have any advice for me?
I think everyone's story is interesting. And the fact that you want to write it yourself means that it's interesting, because otherwise you wouldn't even be thinking about writing the book. But the main thing is you have to focus on what your message is going to be. And who do you think will enjoy hearing it? Would it be children? Would it be other men like yourself? Would it be younger men, older men, professional men? And then you can kind of structure the way that you write your book so that you are talking to the people that you want to listen to your book.
Great. All right. And then another question from Mari, who lives in Camas. She wants to know if you plan to write another book.
At the present time, I don't intend to write another book. I have had a couple of people tell me that I should give a more direct kind of how-to, that I should write a book for how to become a lawyer representing women, how to become a lawyer who then wants to become an arbitrator and solve cases, making it sort of a teaching, a directive kind of book rather than a book about myself. And I'm thinking about that. I also have thoughts about writing a children's book about the working world. My granddaughter is now 10 years old, and I've seen that she and her peers are very much interested in learning about the adult world and how to prepare for it. But these are just kind of up in the air at this point. I'm taking a breather until we get through the pandemic. We'll see what comes in the next day or the next year or so.
Yeah, good plan. Totally understandable. All right. So I just, how can people find your book? You mentioned it's in the library, which it is, but how else can people find the book?
It's available on Amazon. All you have to do is type in the book section my name, Sandra Gangle, or Madam Arbitrator, because Madam Arbitrator gets the page. And it's available in both book form and ebook. And the ebook, I find, is very convenient to read. It's only half the price of the typed book, and it comes through to your computer within minutes. And it's very readable. So I think they've done a fine job. You don't even need to have a Kindle machine in your hand. It comes to your computer. So
great. All right. Well, we're almost at the end of the interview. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to read an excerpt from your book, if you'd like to.
Well, thank you. The one page that I would really like to read is a page about my interview with Hattie Bratzo-Kremen, who was the first woman lawyer in Salem, Oregon. And she became a mentor of mine when I was in law school. And I wanted to just ask her about her career. And I wrote about that interview in my book.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Hattie tossed her auburn hair against the soft leather chair when she's talked. Judges have a hard time dealing with us women as real lawyers, she said. Keep in mind that the women of their world, their wives, legal assistants, court reporters, are subordinate to their authority. They expect women to be meek and girlish. They understand that we are lawyers, but they're confused by that. They expect us to act like the women who they worked with in the past, their mothers and their school teachers. So for now, we have to dress like those women. But I do hope the situation will change and we'll be accepted for who we really are as professionals. Hattie then told me about some of the challenges that she had endured as the sole female lawyer in Salem during the late 1950s and 1960s. She had applied for associate positions in several local law firms, but they only offered secretarial positions. Eventually, she opened her own law office because that was the only way she could practice law. Even then, she said, sometimes when I went to court, the judge would call me honey or dear. It wasn't unusual to be treated as if I didn't belong in the courtroom at all. And then straightening her shoulders and raising her chin a bit, she said, so I decided I would show them that I was really a lawyer to be reckoned with. I ran for district attorney of Marion County. I won that election, even though I didn't have the support of the local bar or the judges. I showed them that I was a respectable, competent lawyer in spite of that attitude. And I was reelected twice. I was this county's prosecutor for 10 years. I loved that interview. She gave me such courage, and she was such a wonderful role model.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you again, Sandra, so much for coming to the Zoom this evening so that we could chat about your book and your process and your wonderful career that you've had. It's really been a treat. So I am going to say goodnight, and we'll get this video on YouTube.
Thank you.
All right. Good night.
Good night.